Do you think that DNA can be used to decode or reconcile the Bible? Well, you know I want to talk about it, so let's go.
Now it's through that door.
But what if it's locked?
Why should it be locked? See? It's open.
Welcome to the Ready Brew. My name is T. Edge, and I'm going to ask, as always, that if you feel that you can debunk this information, please feel free to, but attack the information and not the presenter. Please leave your comment. To all of my new followers, thank you for supporting the channel. To all of the people who have watched the videos and have not yet decided to subscribe, I'm going to encourage you to go ahead and, after this presentation, go through some of the older content, see what you like. If you do like and you find the content and the channel beneficial, turn your phone to the side, click my little watermark here in the corner and become a subscriber. And don't just subscribe, but pass the content on. Encourage friends and family to subscribe. So now, the meat of this presentation. I'm going to issue a warning right here. For a fact, this will irritate your cognitive dissonance. What I've done is what everybody does. They show you what's already available, and some of them make an attempt to rephrase the things that they have heard in the past. But I'm going to attempt to show how the scriptures and the DNA models correlate to history. In the late 1800s, the divisions were made based on linguistics. The linguists took the opportunity to make the people who the Bible called Hamites into Shemites based on the language group and them knowing that the Hebrews were exiled in that area for all those years. The Egyptians and the North Africans, they maintained their Hamite origination based on the linguists. And somehow the sub-Saharan Africans got factored into that Hamite classification. There was a time when the Negro wasn't even thought of as a human. And it was pushed by parishioners and pastors that Negroes were basically beasts of the field, that we were just animals. I mean, of course, it was just a trope to uphold slavery, but at any rate, there was still no factoring in of the Negro in the Bible story, really. So when it comes to the lexicons that we have for Christianity, I think the Strong's was published in the late 1800s. You had the BDB and the BDAG, both published in the early 1900s. Clearly a time when there was a bias when it comes to what is known as race today, or ethnicity. So there's not a lot of factual information that will come out of what is known as Christianity. Although the recognition of the existence of DNA began in the mid-1800s, the human genome was not mapped until 1990. It's still a relatively new science, being less than 40 years in practice. There are a lot of Christians who don't care for DNA because they can't reconcile the things in the Bible, let alone bringing DNA into the mix. We've been taught to examine or survey the Bible strictly from a position of spirituality, and not to look at the physical waypoints or descriptions of territories in the scripture. But when it comes to DNA, the percentages of DNA provided are very small. Something else that comes into play here is migration. People migrate to escape poverty. They migrate to escape war. They migrate to find better opportunities for education and employment, and just to pursue what the world has come to know as the American dream. Only 6% of the world's population is migrant. This means that 94% of people have not left their ancestral home. That means that the DNA samples that are collected, it's a very good chance that this DNA is representative of the area and territory that it's retrieved from. So can migration be confirmed using DNA? In short, migration can be confirmed by studying the remains of ancient burial sites. And it's believed that each clade evolves from the one named before it. In many instances, we can see what DNA is shared at a certain percentage within populations non-characteristic of this specific clade. On an individual basis, it's unclear whether a lower percentage means genetic distance or dilution of the genome similarities. It's likely not a dilution, because even twins born to the same parents do not have the same percentages of shared genomes, and some are showing genomes not shared by the other. So twins born to the same parents at the same time can actually have varying amounts of DNA shown in their DNA profile. I personally believe that the percentage shows how long ago this DNA was shared, and that it's not a measure of how much or the amount of DNA is passed from parent to child. But again, I'm not a DNA scientist or biologist. I am only speculating. If they're speculating and they actually lay this information out, only thing I can do is speculate based on the information that they provide. I do want to go into looking at the possible DNA of the Hebrews and the migrations of Israel. In our group, there is a representation of the haplogroups or the clades. The paternal haplogroups that are shown predominantly in our makeup is haplogroup E, which is the most prominent at E1B1A, haplogroup J, and haplogroup R, which are European for the most part. If I'm not mistaken, J shows to be a Middle Eastern clade. We also show majority haplogroup L from the mitochondrial standpoint. Most of the DNA biologists, they say that the reason we show European DNA is because many of our women, when they were slaves, were violated by European slave owners. And this is why I don't agree. I don't agree because, number one, scripture corroborated by history and archaeology tells us that the Hebrews lived within European communities for centuries. Number two, some of the slaves that were trafficked to the Americas were classified as mulatto. This means that there were actually mulatto people who were getting off of the slave ships. Point number three, the same European autosomal DNA that is in African Americans is found in some of the continental African populations. Some of the African people have European DNA. And point number four, the mitochondrial DNA of the European haplogroups are also represented in the African American populations that are not Hispanic or white. So women, black women who don't have Spanish or European ancestry do show that they don't have African mitochondrial DNA, meaning their line did not start with an African mother. When we look at Bible plus history, the Hebrews migrated to the land of Canaan, which was from Gaza to Sidon. Gaza to Syria. Sidon and Syria, same place. They were enslaved in Egypt, which was Mizraim. They were exiled to the land of Cush, which was Babylon and Assyria. And then they were dispersed throughout Europe and North Africa as slaves beginning in 70 AD. And there was a paper published in, I believe, 2011. I covered this in my last video, that showed that North Africans, Italians, or Southern Europeans and people of Levant have African DNA from 72 generations ago, which was the first century. That encompasses 70 AD. History plus the New World. At the height of the trafficking of enslaved Hebrew bodies, in this, which was the 1780s, slaves severely outnumbered the slave owners. By 1830, the slaves still outnumbered slave owners by approximately 3-1. This means that it would be very difficult for 33% of the population to continuously violate the 66%. Approximately 17% would be male. With that 17%, it seems asinine to think that with the rate at which Africans contain European DNA, that there was that much sexual assault happening when the enslaved could overpower them by number. If we expound on point number 3, history and the Y-Haplogroups. The Spanish, the Franks, and the Dutch maintained colonies in West Africa. Also, it's been documented that the Africans who lived along the Niger proclaimed heritage as Hebrews exiled from European nations as far back as the 1300s. Outside of that, there have been very prominent mulatto men and women throughout European history. Also, let's not forget about Limpieza de Sangre. This happened in Spain and Portugal, and anyone who had Hebrew or African descent or Moorish or Arabian descent could not hold public office. And the classifications for those who had African ancestry: a mulatto was one who had 2 white and 2 black grandparents. A quatroon or quarteroon was one who had 3 white and 1 black grandparent. And an octoroon was one who had 7 white and 1 black grandparent. There was also a hexadecaroon, and a hexadecaroon had 15 white and 1 black grandparent. To trace lineage back that far shows that there was an extensive history of black people and European people having relations and making families. I don't want to forget either to mention that this preceded the 1-drop rule that came over to America. This is, I think, astounding when it comes to deciphering this DNA thing. The African mitochondrial haplogroup is L. Most African Americans have haplogroup L or descend from haplogroup L, which was passed down from their mothers, both male and female. The fathers cannot dictate at all what the mitochondrial DNA is. This is important. In 1996, from 1996 to 1999, there was this study called the REACH study done. In this study, there were 343 young black women from 13 cities across the U.S. These young black women shared no Hispanic or white heritage. And 14% of this group of young black women had haplogroups that were not of the African haplogroup. They were haplogroup haplogroup M, N, R, U, or R0. Now, approximately 25 of these women had this haplogroup R0. Haplogroup R0 is a Levantine Middle Eastern haplogroup. It was only passed on by Middle Eastern mothers. So these women descend from women who were Middle Eastern. Although they were black, although they were completely black with no Spanish or European admixture, or they had descended from, or they descend from, Middle Eastern mothers. If this 14% holds true across the entire diaspora of African Americans, we can see, or we can calculate that approximately 5.6 million black people have an ancestral mother who was not of African descent. The M haplogroup, the M mitochondrial haplogroup, is South Asian. It is represented in Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, the Maldives, Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Iran. The N haplogroup comes from Asia and Australia. The R haplogroup comes from Western and Southern India. The U haplogroup comes from Western Asia or the Middle East. And the R0 haplogroup, as we've laid out, comes from the Arabian Peninsula. So this 14% represents Asian haplogroups. If that doesn't speak loudly to the connection that African Americans have to the Hebrew people of the Bible, based on how the Hebrews lived amongst these people for so many centuries, then I don't know where else we can look. But also, just to make this a little bit more clear, the L haplogroup has been found in European populations, America, the Arabian Peninsula, and Southern Asia. There are actually women who are in these areas who show that they come from African mothers. So this thing, it is flip-flop, and it shows a distinct correlation, I believe, that African Americans are the Hebrews, specifically the Israelites, from the scripture. I want to trace the genome. Now, if you're familiar with the last video I did, you know that I come to the conclusion that Abraham and his descendants come from the area of Mali, basically of the region of Nigeria. So if we trace the genome, Hebrews left Mali and migrated to Canaan. We know that there's a Bab el-Mandeb, of course means the gate of grief, and it was once a land bridge that connected Africa and Saudi Arabia. According to the Bible, that was the territory of Joktan from Mesha to Safar. If we look at Exodus 13, verses 17 through 18, we can see that Moses was instructed to go south because of that existence of that land bridge. And God told Moses not to take the children north because they would run into the Philistines, but to take them south. We see that they left Canaan and went to Egypt. Now, this was during the time when Jacob took his family to Egypt under the invitation of Joseph via Pharaoh. Number 3, we show that there was a trek from Egypt to Canaan. This was the Exodus. They settled as far as Syria. In fact, God promised the Israelites the land of the Canaanites, which is the land from the Nile to the Euphrates. Point number 4. The Assyrians and the Babylonians exiled Israel and took their territories multiple times. Point number 5. After the exile, the Hebrews maintained communities in the areas of Babylon. And if you look at the Babylonian Talmud, there's a section in there that talks about this disparaging comment made about the Hebrews or the Israelites that were born with black skin, because there was so much mixing. They didn't realize that by that time, most of the dark-skinned Jews had left the area because they were tired of being persecuted. Number 6, the early Christ followers preached in Eurasia. In fact, we know that Timothy had a father who was a Greek and a mother who was a Jew. He was mixed. There were Hebrew congregations throughout these territories. Number 7, when the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, the Hebrews were sold into slavery. I mentioned the paper that was published about the African genome and the Southern Europeans, the Levantine people, and the North Africans. Number 8, Christianity pushes some of the Hebrews to Western Europe and others back into Africa. The persecution from the Christians or the Catholics started long ago. This is shortly after the Council of Nicaea. At first, the Jews were accepted, but under the pressure of the Christians, that's why you see a lot who have gone back into Africa, like the Ethiopians, like the people of Aksum, even the people of West Africa. There were some who went to Europe, which leads me to the next point. Point number 9, you had European exiles, Spain and Portugal being the final exile in 1492, before the transatlantic slave trade began in 1501. The Europeans pushed the Hebrews out of their territories in numerous occasions. In the Ashkenazi video, I read how the Germans or the Germanics persecuted the Hebrews, and that they were running all over Western Europe to try to find peace and a safe haven. Personally, some of the DNA that I have comes from Western Europe, comes from Northern Europe. I have DNA that shows in the Baltic area. I have DNA that comes from Iran and India. So we know that these are places that the Hebrews were. In fact, the story of Esther is India, specifically. I mean, there's so many things that are in the Bible that we don't look at, but this DNA, I think, fleshes it out. My last point, the transatlantic slave trade kicks off in the 1600s. There are Hispanic people who have Nigerian backgrounds. There are some Europeans who have Nigerian or African DNA. The Hebrews, our people, have always been a part of this world and have always been included in this family called humanity. I mean, I think it's a disservice when people try to make it seem that it's so far-fetched that we could even be Hebrews. I mean, not to take anything away from the Jewish people. They obviously have had this religion passed down to them from generation to generation. You can't take anything from that. When it comes to the DNA, though, the DNA fleshes out a lot of those things to show who people are. It's not a disparaging remark to say that the Jewish people are German when their DNA shows that they're German. It's not a disparaging remark to say that majority of their DNA does not come from the Levant area. There are some who have heavy Levantine DNA, but guess what? That means that they are mixed with Hamites, not with Shemites. There's so many things that are yet to be uncovered. I mean, I have an honest question. Why has no one stepped up to challenge this information? Why am I the only person who has stepped up? Is it because the indoctrination has people not paying attention to it? Or is it because people who know don't want to rock the boat? They don't want to change the narrative because it makes everything too sticky. I just have so many questions. If you stuck it out with me, thank you. Thank you for making it to this point. And I'll ask the question. Do you think I got anything wrong? Do you think I made a stretch out of anything? Do you think that I pushed something too far? Let's have this discussion. Leave the comments in the comment section. If you want to reach out to me, my email address is therudybrew@gmail.com. I'd be happy to have a conversation. I think it's some conversations that we need to have. And I'm all about learning and trying to find out the latest information, the new information, the real information, the right information, and the truth. But I thank you again for just hanging out with me here at Ready Brew. Until the next time, peace.